Why do you say that, Father? You aren't afraid, are you?
No, but I respect some of the superstitions of others. Often they are founded in fact.
Broadcasting live from our Sanctum Sanctorum in Venice, California, this is the Sixth Sense Society. I'm your host, Krista, here with our producer, Michael, and today we are excited to have back on this show our friend and paranormal sleuth, I like to call him, Craig Owens, who, by the way, is the author of this beautiful book, Haunted by History. I think you can see it, and I totally recommend you buy it if you have not, and even if you have, I think you should buy another one. So there you have it. Before we get started, however, Michael has some announcements.
Hi, everybody. And here we are in lockdown still with the coronavirus. And I hope you guys are taking this seriously and isolating. Chris and I have been staying at home and staying, far away from everyone and our very irresponsible neighbors that are out there running around, talking to all their friends, that we try and give them a wide berth. So try and stay healthy. This thing is not a joke and you guys want to be safe. Thank you so much for supporting our show. Our subscribers keep growing and we encourage you to subscribe to the show. It really helps us. So just click on the link and subscribe, and it's just one of the best things you can do. It makes us just feel appreciated, and that's a wonderful thing. As you can see, we're still broadcasting from our home rather than our studio, and we're looking forward to getting back to our studio at some point because our home is very tiny. But we want to keep bringing you guys the show so that while you're locked up, at least we can entertain you for an hour every week. So we've got some great shows coming up. Next week, we have my good friend and lodge brother, Ray Davis, who's going to talk about Freemasonry. Then we're going to end our guest for the month. Our second guest is going to be Renee Starr, who's a witch, and she'll be talking about some of her beliefs and spells and certain things that have to do with that. Should be magical and fun. And then spell it out to end the month with Krista's free for all on whatever Krista decides she wants it to be about. So she'll figure that out as we get closer. And then we're going to kick off the new month with our friend returning Madame Zalima, who is going to do a show on health and prosperity and things of that nature and some of her spell work. So we've got lots of pagan-y stuff coming up for you guys that love that. Get all the information on our website, sixthsensesociety.com, SIXTH. It's all spelled out, so sixthsensesociety.com. And if you're on the go, you can listen to us as a podcast on Spotify. Just search for us or any of your major podcast services, and we're not too hard to find. So once again, we're going to have a great show. We love having Craig back, and hopefully we'll get into, we just had a little ghost hunt with him of our proper studio before we all went on lockdown. So maybe we can find out if he found anything interesting when he reviewed the evidence. So I'm going to kick it back to Krista, and let's have some fun with Craig.
Great. Thanks, Michael. And welcome back, Craig.
Thank you. Thank you.
We're so happy to have
you.
You
can still hear me okay, right?
Yeah, you sound great. Okay, sound great.
All right, terrific.
So let's, well, how are you holding up now under the pandemic, you and your family?
Oh, well, we started it early, so it feels like it's been a year. I think we're in our third or fourth week, but who's counting anymore? I mostly use my Facebook page, Bizarre Los Angeles, to post updates, statewide entertainment-related updates, which are few and far between because everything's shut down. And so I've been getting a lot of positive feedback for the most part. People writing to thank me for staying on top of the news. The news is mostly grim, though, so I try to lighten it up with some house for sale for $1.5 million. Like, who's going to be doing that at this time right now?
My neighbor.
But the air certainly is clean. The air certainly is clean.
Yeah, and then Michael found an article where they said the Earth was, what was it, Michael? The Earth was not shaking or something, or not moving as much because we're all sitting still?
Yeah, they were saying that because there's no cars and people running around and everything going bump, that the the vibrations that cause in the earth have actually diminished. So the earth has gotten very quiet. And one of the cool things about that was researchers are saying now they can hear minor earthquakes and stuff, volcanic activity that they were never able to hear before because of the background noise isn't there. And then so many other things, the Ganges River is now flowing much cleaner than it's been in decades, and the ozone hole is much smaller than it's been in decades, and air currents are starting to return to their normal patterns. So I think one of the cool things is how quickly the Earth has recovered from this, and maybe that's hope going into the crisis with global warming, that if we get it together, it won't take that long for the Earth to heal, and so maybe that is one of the great benefits coming out of all this.
Yeah, and I got to give Krista a little credit, because when we were talking before this pandemic became a pandemic, you were already kind of pulling up warning signs in your readings that, things were going to get tough. There weren't a lot of people I noticed on social media that were picking up on that. Mm-hmm. I can think of maybe two. Of all the people on my Facebook friend list that were actually sounding alarms mm-hmm. beforehand, but you were one of them. So, kudos to you.
That must be the astrology that I was looking at, the Pluto Saturn, though nobody knew how it would play out. And in fact, it's still going to be playing out for a couple of years, the economy, and according, at least the United States chart, But I think, the best thing we can do is hunker down and all do what we can, because we can see where people are doing it, the difference it makes in the people that don't die, and also not overwhelming the hospitals. And that was, something I think some people just don't seem to get, that even if you don't get it, if you're safe, you can pass it on to people that have to go to the hospital, and then the hospitals aren't prepared and you're overwhelming them. And it shows a lack of, I guess, critical thinking in this culture. That's one.
I'm still seeing posts on Facebook from people in denial, denying the pandemic's severity and its danger. And it's kind of like, how can you not see this by now?
Yeah.
And it's also kind of funny because I'll see posts from people in the South and they're like, day 3 of lockdown, and here's what I'm doing. And it's like, well, I've lost count of days of lockdown that my family and I've been doing. So
yeah.
Fortunately, I've been working on a book in my spare time, and just kind of doing little pet projects, trying to learn new things mm-hmm. without leaving the house. I may go for a walk maybe once a day, mm-hmm. but for the most part, I'm staying in. And right now, this week there was a notice from the governor. I think it was the governor, or maybe it was the mayor. I can't keep track, but they were suggesting that California should stop going to the grocery stores this week, and just kind of in order to try to make a difference and an impact, because California is already beginning to see a leveling.
Yes.
Of the number of cases. It's very minor, and it could blow up at any given time. But, we're always hoping that we're going to, flatten the curve?
Right.
As they say.
Flatten the curve.
So.
Yeah, I heard that too. I heard I don't know if it was an order suggestion. And so even I've been ordering in, even though it's tricky because you don't know what you're going to get. So I've kind of had to juggle, like, okay, they had no lettuce there, so maybe I can get it somewhere else. And I thought I may as well try to be, really strict the next week or two, and just to go along with it. So
yeah.
So I wanted to backtrack a little too, and last time you were on the show, it was part of our October All Things Paranormal, and we wanted to sort of catch up with what you've been up to since then, because from what I can tell, you've been up to quite a few things.
This year was a very busy year, and a lot of exciting changes, at least for me. I worked out a deal with a couple of haunted hotel properties to actually lead history tours. And one was the Alexandria Hotel, downtown LA, very hard to get into. Mm-hmm. And the other was the Aztec Hotel, which has been closed since 2012, 2013.
Oh, wow.
And that's in Monrovia, California. And fortunately, right before the quarantine hit, I came across a whole treasure trove of historical information that really fills in the gaps from like the 40s to about the 80s.
Wow.
And so I always thought that was the synchronicity. I was supposed to be working on this because it happened right before the quarantine hit.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of deaths, a lot more deaths than I thought. I'd always heard, when I first entered the hotel back in 2009, I believe the owner at the time said there were 9 documented deaths, but I couldn't find 9 documented deaths. There was a death that happened during my year of investigating at the hotel. And that kind of creeped me out because there was actually a paranormal angle to the death.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was a man named John, and he was a hotel clerk, like the night desk clerk, and he lived at the hotel. And he was in his 70s, and he had been living there for years. He was an alcoholic, but he had been dry for years. He was still married, but he was estranged from his wife and child, but he still saw them periodically.
Mm-hmm.
Very bright man, had a major history background. He had worked on Broadway in his youth as a tech manager and theater manager, and he was gruff when I first met him. I thought, oh, he's really unfriendly. But as I got to know him, he started like opening up to me, and we developed a really nice friendship over the course of a year that I knew him.
Mm-hmm.
And he would call me out of the blue every now and then to ask a question, and I would drop by and always make a point of seeing him if he was around. But I had asked him, once it got to a comfortable point where we could talk about the paranormal at the Aztec Hotel, I asked him if, anything had ever happened to him in all of his years living there.
Mm-hmm.
And he said no, nothing ever happened to him, but he was open to the suggestion that there was something there. It's just that he had never noticed it. Then, as the year progressed, I guess I'd already started researching the history by this time, so I was spending a little less time at the hotel and more time in the Monrovia Public Library, going over microfiche. And it was right after Halloween and right around Thanksgiving time, or shortly before, I made a visit to the Aztec, just a routine visit, just to say, hi, how's everything going? And he was real excited. And he said, I've been wanting to call you. I was going to call you. After all these years, something finally happened.
Ooh.
And I said, what is it? And he said, I was working late at night, just doing my thing. I was reading a book. It was all quiet. And about 4 a.m, suddenly he looked up, and from a window in the lobby, the window's no longer there, but there was a window that looked into the bar, the Mayan restaurant and bar. There was a window there. And he said that he saw a very large black bat enter the lobby from that window. And it just hovered about 5 feet off the ground as it made its way across the lobby towards him. And he was behind the front desk, but as the bat got close enough to the front desk, suddenly it just dived down and out of sight behind the desk, the other side of the desk. So he put down his book, he walked around the desk, and he turned the corner, and he was expecting to see a stunned bat laying on the ground, but there was nothing there.
Oh, wow.
And so he asked me what that was. He said it was pitch black. And I said, well, you sure it's a bat? Was it flapping its wings wildly, or was it gliding? He said it was gliding. And I said, well, bats don't glide. They're flapping their wings, and they tend to fly erratically, not in a smooth, slow plane. And I said, so I don't think it was a bat. And he said, well, what do you think it is? And the best I could come up with at the time was that I said, well, this is the first story that I've heard about a black object that is not human in shape, kind of floating across the lobby at the Aztec. But in other case files around the world, people have reported a shadow figure or whatever that resembled a stingray or manta. And I said, did it look more like a stingray than a bat? And he said, well, it could have been a stingray, because the descriptions of shadow figures or whatever as a stingray, it's a gliding one. Because stingrays glide through the water. This
Sure.
glides more or less. I'm not calling it a stingray, but it more resembles that than a bat. And I said, but I have to look into that, because those kind of cases where people have reported that are very rare. But in the meantime, I recommend that you see a doctor and get checked up, because it could be something wrong with your eyes or with whatever. But just make sure that you're okay inside. And I'll look into it. Well, that was the last time I saw him alive.
Oh, wow.
This happened. He told me this had happened on a Friday night. He told me the following Wednesday. Then I got the call on Friday or Saturday that he had, it was exactly a week to the date that he had seen this shadow creature. He had gotten off work at 6, 7 in the morning. He had seen his wife and his estranged wife and son for the last time. And as he drove his car into the parking lot, and as he was stepping out of his vehicle, his heart stopped and he fell and broke his neck.
Oh, God, that's
and
sad.
The paramedics arrived on the spot after 10 minutes, and they were able to keep the body alive, but the brain was dead.
Oh.
And so he was on life support. And so next of kin were notified. The wife was notified. The kids were notified. And whatever family, they all converged on the Aztec, and they, were looking through his stuff and trying to get things in order. And then they had a meeting about what to do with the body, because he was a vegetable and would never regain consciousness because he had been dead too long,
Right.
Brain dead too long. And this was the next following Friday/Saturday. So they made their mind to pull the plug. But before they could do it, to the day of a week to the day of the accident, 2 weeks to the day of seeing this black manta looking thing, he just dies on the machine. So this came as a huge blow to everyone living at the Aztec and working at the Aztec, because he had been a very popular and very likable person. He had been like a grandfather to a lot of the kids that were living in the hotel. And it really shook everyone up that this would happen to him. And it shook me up. I mean, I told the doctor that he had seen something like right before he had his accident. Maybe that's a side effect. A hallucination of some sort, of a side effect of what actually might have killed him. And so the owner said that she did, and the doctor was like, just brushed it off and said, no one's going to have a hallucination. His heart just stopped. It was like, there's no warnings like that. And it a lot of the things with the hallucination didn't quite make sense, because hallucinations usually don't dart out of sight behind things, especially things up close. I mean, I know people have seen hallucinations look like they're appearing from behind corners or behind furniture, but it's real difficult for the reports of hallucinations being out in the open and then disappearing behind something is a lot more rare. So I called a moratorium on all research because I thought it would be in real bad taste to
Mm-hmm.
continue ghost hunting right after that.
Sure.
But I did get calls from some of the kids a few months later that swore they saw him
Wow.
roaming the halls, and he had a red jacket that he used to wear a
Uh-huh.
lot, and you see that flash of red of a man walking down the hall and disappear around the corner. Now I've since looked for this person
Mm-hmm.
because I thought, well, if he recognizes me, he'll reach out to me
Mm-hmm.
because I had gained his trust in life. Perhaps I'd gain his trust in the afterlife if there is such a thing. But I never could find any signs that he was there.
I wonder if when people are about to die, at least there's a book on I forget what it's called, and it's from doctors, where when people are about to die, they start to see relatives. And
Mm-hmm.
in other words, that they can start seeing the afterlife. And my grandmother went through that, and she would start talking to her sister Lily, who she never talked about in life, as if she was like standing in the room. And at the time, I was open to metaphysics, but I did think it was just delusional, you know. And then when I found that book, that it's very common that they just start seeing different relatives. Right, you know, with my grandmother, it was about probably 1 or 2 weeks, maybe 1 week before she passed. So I
Yeah.
wondered if maybe he was going to pass anyway, and if he just his sight opened up to
Yeah, it's
see
called
things.
thinning of the veil. Some people refer to it as thinning of the veil
Right.
between like dimensions or whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly, it could have been a harbinger of some sort. I'm not sure I'm a strong believer in harbingers, but this story would support that notion. So I certainly can't discount that it was some kind of harbinger of some sort. Like I said, there have been reports at the Aztec of shadow figures darting around or shadows darting around. This was very dramatic,
Mm-hmm.
seeing a stingray. And of course, to answer anyone's question out there, what did he do right after he saw that? Was that because that was my question. What did you do immediately after doing that? What were you thinking? And, you know, he basically said that he thought it might be his vision, so he just changed reading glasses.
Good for him.
Kept on his ship, you know, and but it rattled him to where he wanted to tell me, and he was very excited
Mm-hmm.
about it when he told me. Now, another piece of information, not that it's really going to help build the story. It'll fill it out a little bit more, but it doesn't provide any answers per se, is that the night, his last night at work, he had been, there was a disturbance at the hotel where he had to call the police to get some tenants to stop being obnoxious
Mm-hmm.
on the second floor. So he had been very upset and kind of agitated and high strung when he got off work at 6. Usually he sleeps for an hour or two.
Mm-hmm.
And then when he does these visits with his family, but he was too jumbled up inside to actually rest. So he just went from one to the other, and then it killed him. So that piece of information is not paranormal. It could explain why his heart gave out.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
But, you know, there was blood everywhere from what I understand. I had heard some other stories that were just horrible about, like, 2 guys had witnessed it and they didn't do anything. They just, because they were smoking something illegal at the time and they didn't want to get busted for reporting it. I heard all kinds of hearsay
Right.
stories
Right.
about surrounding the death. Let's just say whether it's true or not, I don't care. What the point is that it affected a lot of people's lives, and he was sorely missed. And I went to his wake. I went to his funeral. I got to see how his family acted and interacted with one another, and tried to get more of a sense of the man than what I knew. But that has always haunted me personally. that story, and I just felt like I wish I had an answer as to what he had seen and why he had seen it.
Mm-hmm. That is unusual. I've never heard of anything. I've heard of shadow figures, but not the way you describe it, and it being like a stingray. That sounds
As a stingray,
like that might have
yeah.
given me just a heart attack right there. It's just, I mean, if you think, if you're not really, you've never seen anything like that, and it's
Looks like I'm
nighttime.
ghosting in and out.
Well, what do you, what do you think, if you, I don't know if you believe this, but sometimes I feel, for myself, I'll say that, for instance, I resisted for many, many, many years even wanting to be connected to ghosts, even though you'd think someone like me would want to, and to the point where I met a woman she had these really interesting, she called them her aunties, that were they were unusually psychic. They actually twice answered a question in my mind and sent it to my friend. It was uncanny. I honestly, and it was only for a period of time. It was only when I was going through a difficult time. And they knew that about my interest in metaphysics, and they would say that, they'd laugh when I say, well, I really don't want to have anything to do with ghosts. I don't want to see a ghost. And they'd say, oh, that's really funny. And I was like, and that was before I kind of met Jeff, I think, in Kashmir. And so this show too has kind of dragged us more into the ghost hunting than we didn't plan it that way. It just happened that way. So I wonder sometimes, I don't know my purpose. I don't know what I'm supposed to do, but I don't resist it anymore. I'm just more like, okay, whatever is going to be is going to be. I'm going to be open to where it will take me and not resist it so much. And so with you, I mean, having that's such an odd thing to happen when you're a researcher like you, that you research, you want authentic knowledge about the place and about what happened. And here, exactly what happened. And so what do you think? Do you think that it might have a purpose in some way for you?
That is a question I ask. I mean, I've always said that I think I got the ghost. I just was leaning too far back in my chair, and so I was turning into a spook. Let's see, if I lean forward, I'm okay. So let me just keep leaning forward. I always kind of said that I think the paranormal picked me more than I picked it. And, I came in as a reluctant believer and a skeptic-minded person, while deep down inside I believed, and you might say I wanted to believe, might argue that, and I would agree with that. At the same time, I also knew that there was a lot of myths and a lot of misinformation out there, and so I was really kind of soul searching to find out what's out there that is the truth, or speaks closer to the truth than a lot of the common superstitions or common beliefs, because a lot of the beliefs are not based on anything really. Mm-hmm. It may be media generated and perpetuated in the media, but they may not be true at all. So I had read some books as a teenager on parapsychology, so I actually think more like an old school parapsychologist, on some level. So and so I keep that kind of scientific mindset. I don't conduct scientific experiments per se, but you don't necessarily need to if you have a scientific mind when you approach interpreting data that's collected at haunted locations.
Have you, I happen to be reading the book, The Holographic Universe. That's been out for a long time, and I've always meant to finish reading it. It's by Michael Talbot. And it's, have you read that book?
I have not.
Well, what's interesting, it's not just about the concept of how the universe could be holographic, and there's the physics part, which he does simplify, but I still found it a little difficult to comprehend, like in a scientific way. But there's this hypothesis throughout the book that there can be some phenomena that can be explained through this model of the universe, including something called retrocognition, where it's the ability of certain people to shift their focus of their attention and literally go back in time. And he gave these examples of people I've never heard of that were tested. One was a Dutch psychic called Gerard Crosset. And basically, he would hold an object, psychometry, but he really could tell you details about many, many things about it. And according to him, once he held that object, he had this experience of shifting into this other reality where he literally saw everything like a 3D movie. And he could go where he wanted and whatever area. And I guess they tested over 100 objects with him, this archaeologist who was a skeptic. And he's not the only one they've tested. But what I was really impressed about was he really got details, because I personally have never met anyone that could get details consistently psychically. Everyone has psychic hits, I think. You know, you have it, your kids have it. That doesn't make you a clairvoyant. It makes you have, the possibility. And I'd never heard of this. It's called retrocognition. I was wondering if that could be something that maybe when people are ghost hunting, where they're picking that up, that past information of what happened through a different means.
I'm not sure about that. I will say that the subconscious mind is quite amazing, and I will tell you that when I was doing research for my book, the historical part, what I did, because I would get asked questions, when did you know when to stop, with the history, and it was I would get so involved and I would get so focused, almost like just passionate focus on something, that when I started hearing in my inner ear and in my inner head the sounds of the hotel, the smells of the hotel, the look of the hotel, and you got just kind of all your inner senses picking up on the hotel, that's when I knew I had connected to the hotel from a historical point of view, more than spiritual. I felt like, okay, I've got the answers. It is such a clear picture inside my head of what life was like at these locations, whether it's the Hotel del Coronado. But it took a while. Sometimes it would take, 2-3 months of that kind of intensity before it would come through. And if there were big chunks of history missing in the timeline, and where I'm just kind of speculating what might have happened to fill in those gaps, I wasn't quite connected. What's kind of cool is that in almost every single case where I had to speculate, I sometimes would have to sit back and wait, but that information would eventually pop out of somewhere, and it would completely justify what my intuition was, that this actually was. I actually did get the documentation that filled in that particular hole. And suddenly it's like putting together a massive jigsaw puzzle. History in itself is just as big a mystery as the paranormal on many different levels.
Absolutely.
That's why they play so well together. Yeah. And why there is in my opinion, a very strong connection between the two. And if you get the history wrong, you're going to screw up the paranormal part later. You really, really have to connect to the history in order to be able to accurately interpret. And that means you have to know where the urban legends are, because that will throw you off every time. And you'll end up looking for ghosts that don't exist because you didn't bother to do the homework, research whether or not that story was even true or not, and who started it, when it started, all that other thing. So that's why I hit home. But back to the original point that you were making, there is something weird about it where if you just obsess and get really connected into something, those sights and sounds and things start kind of happening inside your head. One of my favorite stories, I don't know if I told it on the last show or not, was that at one point in the 90s, I was absolutely obsessed with Buster Keaton.
Huh.
He
No, I
was
don't think
my
you told that
favorite
story.
comedian.
Huh.
He was my favorite comedian. He was, was just on this, a lot of his stuff hadn't been released on DVD yet. So I was absolutely obsessed with trying to see all of his old stuff from his prime. So when the Silent Movie Theater on Fairfax would do a Buster Keaton film festival, I was there. I had to see it. And I was reading everything I could. The internet was very young at that time, so there wasn't a whole lot of information about Buster Keaton or his life or his haunts or whatever. So one day I was working as a production assistant, and hadn't been in Los Angeles too long, but I wanted to find Buster Keaton's grave. And but it was not marked anywhere. All I knew was that it was at Forest Lawn, Hollywood Hills, right across the street from Warner Brothers Studio. So I was working a lot as a production assistant at the time, so I had to pick a day that I wasn't working and try to go to this massive memorial park to look for his grave. So there was a Sunday that came open. So I said, okay, I'm going to do it. So I set up a big chunk of time. I think I set aside like 5 hours to look for Buster Keaton's grave. So I drive up through the drive, and there's this little hut with the security guard right there. And I thought, well, just for the sake of asking, I should go ahead and ask, where's Buster Keaton's grave, just to do diligence. And of course, he wouldn't tell me because that's the policy of the memorial park, is they never tell where the graves are. So I drove around probably about 5-10 minutes, just driving around this massive place. And then finally I decided, I guess I need to get out and just start looking by foot, because all the gravestones are flat on the ground.
Right.
Because they want it to look like rolling hills. So there are no tombstones or headstones protruding up from the ground. Everything's flat. So I just found this random place I thought was random, and I pulled over. I got out, and I was like 5 feet from Buster Keaton's grave.
That's great.
I mean, I literally practically stumbled over it.
Wow.
So after seeing that, I was like, well, what am I going to do for the rest of my time? I had set aside the whole day to look for it, and I found it immediately. Now, what are the odds of that?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree
What are
with
the
you.
odds of that? I don't even think I could do that again. If I wanted to, I don't think I could do that again. But I was so obsessed with Buster Keaton at that time, much more so than I am now. But at that point, I just subconsciously, it led me there.
Yeah, that kind of focus and obsession, I totally agree. It does create interesting phenomena to lead you in your life, whether it's a person or some kind of topic.
Synchronicity, both good and bad.
Yeah.
But if you obsess. But yeah, in this particular case, it was just one of those where I'm scratching my head going, no one's going to believe this. Yet everyone has stories like this, and at least their lifetime, of something where you focus on it and then it manifests.
Yes.
And so maybe what you're talking about with the people holding objects and being able to tune in, there's all kinds of interesting theories out there right now. And I don't want to give it away too much, but in fact, I can't really. But I'm real close friends with Brandon Alvis of the Ghost Hunters show. And he's a very scientific minded. We were friends before he got on the show. And he kept calling me from different parts of the set, while shooting season 2. He's going, Craig, remember when we had this conversation about this? So I can't tell you. What happened, but it's exactly what you're thinking. So you're really going to have to see this. And it's like, I wish I could tell you, I just can't. You're going to have to see it, but, and I'm like, okay. It's like, it's great to know that you may be right about something that you But one of the things that has been bandied around is that, some people claim that they can see ghosts more than others. It may not be necessarily a psychic thing, after all. It may actually have to do with proteins in the eye.
That kind of makes sense.
Extra proteins in the eye that, because we're now beginning to determine, I can't give away too much. You'll have to see the show, but apparently I can say this, they have claimed that they have actually photographed ghosts in haunted locations on video using scientific cameras.
Oh. So that'll be on the show this year?
Yeah.
Interesting.
And so that's all I can say about it because I haven't seen it. I don't know the details about it, except that it opens up a whole new discussion about what ghosts are.
I like that.
And it may play into the fact that there may be some connection between the materials or the current scientific explanation for manifestations and possibly certain elements in the eye that some people have and some people don't. So I don't know.
Yeah, that's fascinating with the eye when you think of how birds can see things differently.
Yeah.
They see, don't they see UV and things like that because of the way their eyes are? So, well, I'll look forward to that. One of the things I did want to ask you about on the show before it gets too much later is about the investigation you did with Jeff Mendel and Kashmir at Sunset Lodge.
Yeah, they were great.
Aren't they great?
I need to call them. I just found Jeff's number just a few days ago, and so I feel bad that I haven't called him already. No excuse on my end.
Oh, he'll don't worry about that. Just call him, honestly. He's a really nice guy.
But he was, I really, really liked the discussions with both of them. And yes, we had quite a weird experience there. And I don't know what it is about these social civic buildings, the secret clubs, whether it's Masonic or, elk or whatever, but there's a lot of them that even American Legion, they all have their stories. And so when you guys told me about the Masonic Lodge, I was hoping something would happen, and that was pretty odd. We did hear a sound, an audible, that actually unfortunately it got picked up kind of faintly on the recorders, but it seemed, to our senses, it seemed much louder. But that kind of sigh in the kitchen area.
Right.
Where I turned around and was like, did one of you yawn? Because that's what it sounded like to me. It sounded
I forgot about that. Yes, I remember that.
Someone
now.
Someone kind of yawned, and when you said no, it wasn't me, I turned to Kashmir. No, it wasn't me. It sounds feminine, like a yawn in the room, and we did catch that on audio. So I haven't listened to it in a while, but that was great. It's super rare to hear audibles.
I think I don't think Jeff and Kashmir have gone through all of the previous recordings they did at the lodge before, so I'd be curious to see. I mean, I know he has a lot of recordings in general that he's not gone through because he records so much. So I'd be interested to see if he got anything there, because I think there was something in the kitchen that time too. We all heard these voices, so something similar.
Some of the voices we were able to debunk.
Yes, we were the night before though. They
across the street,
yeah, the one before that there was no one around though. But yeah, we went across the street and they were playing some sort of soccer or something like that.
Yeah. But the woman sounding like she was sighing, that was definitely that was too close for it to have been, the soccer match. Once we were able to determine that was kind of bleeding through very faintly near the stove area, the oven area. yeah, I'd love to come back. That was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. Incidentally, about a week later, I did an event at the Elks Lodge at the Reseda Van Nuys Elks Lodge.
Oh, cool.
And it too was a 1920s building, but the Elks took it over in 1957, and before then it was an Oddfellow building. In fact, that was one of its original purposes was the Oddfellow group.
What are the Oddfellows?
They were another civic social group like
okay.
Rotarians. Like, they had their own secret code and their own, way of doing things. Oddfellow, you have to look it up.
Mm-hmm.
They're not as well known today as they were back then, but they were just a bunch of Oddfellows.
I guess so.
Sometimes I sound like Inspector Clouseau, I swear. It is. So I don't really know exactly what the rite was, but what's cool about it is that when I met the head person of the Elks at the time, and he told me the urban legends about the building, and the urban legends had to do with it being a children's orphanage and a children's hospital, and because there's children ghosts supposedly been picked up and heard there, which is really strange, being that you wouldn't really equate children with Elks or Masons or any other kind, or even Oddfellows.
Sure.
And so I did the first search through historical archives. I caught a couple of acting schools for children that had moved in and moved out in the 50s or 40s, but that isn't a really solid lead on trying to track down where these stories might be emanating from, the historical link.
Mm-hmm.
But then I hit the mother lode, and one of the urban legends is almost correct. It wasn't a children's hospital, and it certainly wasn't an orphanage,
mm-hmm.
but it was Van Nuys' emergency hospital for over 10 years.
Oh.
And it was a receiving emergency hospital for mostly people having accidents in the farms, rural area, because Van Nuys in the 1920s was still pretty rural,
mm-hmm.
had a very small population. And so motor accidents, fires, whatever that needed immediate attention went to this place. There were 2 surgeons on staff and 1 nurse, and there were deaths there, quite a few. Now, I didn't come across any children per se, but I'm still looking. But there certainly were people, a lot of them were pronounced dead at the scene or pronounced dead upon arrival at the hospital. And as soon as they were treated or pronounced dead, then they were shipped to another, either hospital or the morgue. But there's your smoking gun as to why that building is active.
Right. I think Michael has a question or comment.
Yeah,
Sure.
I just wanted to turn Craig on to a lead, and I don't know if there's any ghosts there or not. I'll have to let you go down and investigate and poke around and find out. But if you've ever been down to Oliveira Street, the old part of L.A., there's a little building there that actually was the oldest Masonic lodge in Los Angeles, and upstairs was the lodge room, and it was a very tiny little building, tiny little lodge room. But it was the early settlers of Los Angeles that had it. And then this will totally appeal to you. If I'm not mistaken, downstairs they used to make caskets. They actually had a casket shop where they would make caskets. So if any place is stirred up, it has to be a place that's both a Masonic lodge and a casket maker at the same time. So next time you're down to the old part of LA, you'll have to poke around a little bit. Maybe you can make nice with somebody down there, and they'll let you inside to poke around some.
Are there plaques, or I guess
there's a plaque on the outside of the building. Absolutely. There's a plaque on the outside of the building that tells about it and everything. So sure, absolutely.
There are so many buildings in that whole area that have their little ghost stories.
Yeah.
The Golondrina restaurant on Olvera Street has a ghost or 2 there, supposedly. The main Adobe, the oldest Adobe what's it called?
Oh, I forget
What's
too.
it-
I
I'm gonna
forget.
say it's the Olivas Dobie, but that may be wrong. Um, but it's supposed to be haunted. Now the city downplays it considerably, but the ghost story. What's interesting about that is that you go pick up paranormal books and they talk about, they usually get the history wrong. There's a book called Ghost Hunter's Guide to Los Angeles. Horrible book as far as historical misinformation and ghosts attributed to the wrong building. The story's been changed
Oh,
from. It's not a good, accurate book whatsoever. However, with the I want to say, I'm just going to call it the Olivas Dobie until someone corrects me. That oldest adobe in Los Angeles, the one that's on Olvera Street,
mm-hmm.
was the final home of the lady that rescued Olvera Street and turned it into a tourist person.
Oh.
Her name was Christina Sterling. She actually died in that house. She lived there when she was in her 70s or 80s. And ironically enough, the ghost stories started being reported shortly after her death.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're looking for things like an emotional connection, who would be emotionally connected to that area to want to stay and protect it or haunt it? And she is, suspect number one in my book.
Mm-hmm.
Yet you go to the ghost hunting books and they're talking about people from the 19th century and, someone that lived there who may not have actually lived there at all.
Mm-hmm.
So, the key to trying to figure out things from a historical mindset is try to figure out when the ghost stories started being talked about, either as a whisper campaign or it starts getting published in newspapers and
Mm-hmm.
books. And then look at what happened in the 5 to 10 years prior to that. The launching of those ghost stories. Were there any tragedies? Were there any deaths? Because that may be where that window of time shortly before the haunting actually starts getting noticed. That may be where your personality that may be haunting it is, or that piece of history that's still lingering around. So in that particular case, I'd love to get there. The Pico House. I got permission to go to the Pico House. They're going to charge me an arm and a leg to shoot there for 24 hours for my book. Mm-hmm. And I almost said yes. And to some degree, I kind of regret eventually saying no, but $5,000 for 24 hours shooting.
Ooh, that is a lot.
And it's a gutted building, so it cost a couple of more $1,000s to dress it up.
Right.
And not to mention costuming people there. And from a paranormal investigating point of view, because I'm not going to do a photo shoot without a paranormal investigation when you're doing these things, because it's the photo shoots that are designed to stir it up.
Sure.
With the helicopters flying by and the noises from the Olvera Street all hours of the night, it just sounded like a nightmare, a logistical nightmare to actually have a controlled environment to run a few tests.
Sure. Michael, you have another question?
Well,
sure.
we're getting kind of close to the end, and one of the things I wanted to make sure we talked about briefly are some, and they're not happening now, obviously, but some of the ghost tours that Craig has been organizing, and a chance to hang out with Craig and visit some of the places that he loves and get some of the history and backstory. So maybe Craig can tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the Alexandria, I hope all of these go back into effect. I mean, I believe the Alexandria and the Aztec were just waiting for the lockdown and the quarantine to lift. But I actually got contacted by the granddaughter of one of the original owners of the Alexandria Hotel.
Wow.
And it was actually, she's still alive. The granddaughter's still alive. She's in her 90s. It was her son that actually contacted, but he wanted to take her mother. Her mother wanted to see the hotel one more time.
Aww.
And so I was very honored for that. But one of the things that I learned that I didn't really, I guess, know is that I do know that her ancestor died on the Lusitania
Oh,
when it was
wow.
torpedoed. And her mother lived, but her grandmother lived, but her grandfather died. And his name was A.C. Billick, I believe. And what I didn't know is that they never found his body.
Oh,
So his body was lost at sea during the rescue after while the Lusitania was sinking. So the grandmother survived. She got married again, and then that's where this person was born under that marriage. But she had stories about her grandfather, the one that died on the Lusitania, and the Alexandria owner, and they had some pictures, so they were going to bring them and share them. And that was going to be an emotional one, and a special treat for anybody that had bought tickets for that one. So hopefully they'll come out when the next tour opens up. As far as the Alexandria goes, Aztec goes, yes. Everyone always talks about that second floor hallway being like something out of The Shining, very gloomy, very creepy. I actually finally found documentation that in 1950 someone actually died in that hallway.
Ooh.
So I'm saying this with glee. It's not really designed to be for glee, other than it was a eureka moment because people have had experiences in that hallway, and there is something that may very well directly tie into it. And so I've estimated the number of deaths at the Aztec right now to be at 10.
Wow.
And there's still a lot of mystery to that building. There are things that I would love to check out still, but I don't have permission to check them out. The hotel doesn't allow paranormal investigations at this time, but when people go to these tours, if they ask me, I'll tell them a few things that I know. But if they are going in with a sense of wondering, they probably heard the ghost stories, but wondering why, they'll get a sense of why just by taking one of my tours. They don't even really have to ask questions without being able to put two and two together. But if you try to get the history online, it's so incomplete or incorrect. So I'm really trying to set the record straight so that people know exactly what they're getting into when they step into the hotel. And so other places real quick, we'll be going back to the Elks Lodge. We'll be going back to the California Theater in San Bernardino. There's some other places that we had gotten permission to go to before the lockdown started. I can't really list those, but the turnout's been great. A lot of times the tours sell out within hours, and so I barely have a chance to market them before they're sold out.
That's great.
And people really seem to like it and like what I'm doing. It's very different from what the norm is. And some are paranormal investigations, some are history tours. So I try to add a balance so that if it's a paranormal investigation, the history will be just to the point and brief so that they can investigate. If it's a history tour, it's almost the opposite. It's a lot more talk on history with a little time set aside for talking paranormal if they want to.
That's great.
Amazingly enough, the people on the history tours don't really ask questions about the paranormal that much. It's really weird. I'm like going, don't you guys want to know? A lot of them just seem like they're very timid to ask.
Well, I know history can be fascinating too, honestly, the more you dig into it.
I think a lot of them got so lost in the history that they forgot to even ask.
Yeah. And your stories, your history in Haunted by History are wonderful. They're wonderful stories of life, so people can relate to that.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
Well, thank you again for coming back on. We're so happy to always have you on, and thank you for your friendship. And we really wish your family safety and wellness through this really difficult time in the world. We'll all get through it, though.
Thank you. Yeah. We're all going to get through it all, and we made it this far.
Yes.
But thank you for your friendship too.
Oh, you're welcome. And thank you all for watching, and take care of yourselves and your loved ones. Until next time, please continue to explore the esoteric and the obscure.